A very warm welcome to Addis News Hour with the news. I'm Shifar Olako and please stay with us. Now, the Ministry of Health has advised for strict adherence to COVID-19 prevention protocols during the AU summit in Addis Ababa. Ethiopia has finalized preparations to host the 35th African Union Summit here in the capital. Though the AU traditionally holds its annual summits at the headquarters in Addis Ababa, it had not been able to hold the summit in person due to the coronavirus outbreak over the past 2 years. However, after 2 years, the member states decided to hold the 35th ordinary session of the Assembly of the AU here in Addis Ababa at the beginning of February. And the Health Minister, Dr. Liya Tadesse, announced that all the necessary preparations have been made to prevent the spread of the coronavirus during this summit, and the highest possible prevention protocols of COVID-19 will be implemented in all activities related to the summit, she said.
With regard to the 35th AU Summit, the participants ought to practically implement the necessary prevention mechanisms, including bringing test result, vaccination certificate. But most importantly, the place where we serve the guests, especially the hotels and transport service providers, are ordered to adhere to the highest possible prevention protocols. We have reached an agreement with the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Africa CDC, for participants to take fast COVID-19 tests daily, everyone to strictly adhere to the COVID-19 prevention guidelines everywhere, especially during the meeting, hotel and transport interactions.
Now, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina Mufti, on Sport said, as Ethiopia is a host nation and as the center of the AU, it is firmly committed to undertaking it by the next week. Listen to this.
African Union Summit every year consists of various agenda. For the ministers pass a decision to the heads of states and stand in unison to find out solutions for Africa's problems. Thus, there is a preparation in Ethiopia to welcome African brothers and sisters coming to their second home Ethiopia for the 35th the African Union Summit.
The Minister of Government Communications Service, Leggesa Tulu, states that the upcoming AU summit to be held in Addis Ababa has overturned the unwarranted speculations and disinformation by some elements who were set to tarnish the image of Ethiopia. The propaganda and pressure waged by some Western countries on Ethiopia, tarnishing the image of the country by blowing their trumpet of falsehood, attempting to show that Addis Ababa is not a safe place to host the 35th AU Summit of Heads of State and Governments due to security issues are once again futile. Despite the propaganda ploy, Ethiopia has been preparing itself to host the 35th AU Summit. The holding of the summit clearly shows that Ethiopia has become victorious against all odds and continued its journey toward a better future, he underscored. It is to be noted that the AU is indebted to Ethiopia not only because the country is a founding member of the Continental Organization, but also because the nation has rendered immense contributions to the maintenance of peace and security in the African region. Welcome back. Now moving on, the African Union, formerly called Organization of African Unity, is an intergovernmental organization established to promote unity and solidarity of African states, to spur economic development and to promote international cooperation, among other things. And Ethiopia is the seat of this organization, and it has contributed immensely to the formation of the organization. Look at this.
እኛ አፍሪካውያን በአሁኑ ጊዜ በዓለም ላይ የተለየ ስፍራ ይዘናል። ብዙ መቶ ዓመታቶች በጭቆና በባርነት የኖርን በመሆናችን ማናቸውም ሕዝብ ነፃ ሆኖ ሊኖር ይገባዋል ብሎ ለመከራከር ከኛ የበለጠ ሊኖር አይችልም። እኛ አፍሪካውያን ብዙ መቶ ዓመታት ዳኝነትና መብት ተነፍገን የቆየን ስለሆን ዛሬ ትክክለኛ ዳኝነትና መብት ካለን ድምጻችንን በመናሰማበት ጊዜ ልንሰማ እንችላለን። የቅኝ አገዛዝ በመሰረቱ የተሳሳተ ሐሳብ ስለሆነ ከዓለም ላይ እንዲወገድ አጥብቀን እናስባለን።
We're still staying on the AU summit, and Ethiopian Airlines has announced a 15% of discounts for African Union summit participants. The summit will be held under the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition on the African Continent, Accelerate the Human Capital, Social and Economic Development. Bringing Africa together for 75 years. Fly with the flagship carrier of Africa for the African Union summit and get up to 15% discount, according to the airlines. Hotels, in collaboration with tour companies, have also prepared packages for their guests to visit historical sites in the capital, Tourism Ministry said. Now, various African leaders have been pushing for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, and the call, which hasn't yet been answered, will continue. And the leaders have been urging for comprehensive reform of the body in order to make it more representative, democratic and accountable, thereby minimizing the unfair meddling of some in the African matters. Goshumaliso has reviewed some of the speeches of African leaders in this regard.
Africa, with 1.3 billion people, is not well represented at the UN Security Council. The views and thoughts of large African people cannot be heard at that high level in the same way as the views of the countries which have the veto rights are heard. Thus, some veto-powered countries so far have tried to twist the hands of Africa to pursue their hidden agenda. All 54 African countries are among the 193 member states, of which only Russia, the US, China, the United Kingdom and France are permanent members of the Security Council and has decision-making body. African leaders have time and again tried to push for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. The then chairperson of the AU and Zimbabwe's President Robert Mugabe called for the reform of the United Nations Security Council.
We come to the United Nations, it's ceremonial. Every year, September, we are there. We pay lots of money to go there. And to the General Assembly, we make speeches, we go back home, year in, year out. But the bosses in the Security Council say, you shall never have the powers that we have as permanent members. And we have asked and asked and asked. and asked, reform the Security Council.
Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, similarly called that the UN Security Council should be reformed.
I believe the Security Council and the UN should be reformed, and I've made that clear. The financial institutions here in Washington and the Security Council should be reformed.
Former South African President Jacob Zuma also reproached the UN Security Council bogged down by domestic interests of a few states.
The UN Security Council is supposed to act in our collective interests without being bogged down by domestic narrow interests of few states. It is imperative and urgent that the United Nations, and in particular the Security Council, should be reformed. 1 billion people cannot continue to be denied a voice in this manner.
Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has similarly voiced his dismay that Africa is not represented as the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council.
Africa should be adequately represented on the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member category. In this regard, Nigeria stands ready to serve Africa and the world on a reformed Security Council to advance international peace and security.
In his address at the 75th anniversary of the UN Security Council, the current South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called for the greater representation of African countries on the UN Security Council.
On the 75th anniversary of the UN, we repeat our call for greater representation of African countries on the Security Council, and that this be taken up with urgency at the intergovernmental negotiations.
Africa, which provides a very large share of the UN security agenda and is also the focus of considerable work of the organization, has absolutely no voice in the Council.
Despite some Western's efforts to vilify and tarnish Ethiopia's image, lobbying that Ethiopia is unsafe to host the 35th AU Summit, the East African nation has finalized preparations to host the summit with its cordial and warm hospitality.
Now, over the years, a number of landmark achievements have been amongst new initiatives the African Union spearheaded. And Agenda 2063, launching of e-passport, launch of African Continental Free Trade Area, were amongst the crucial achievements that the African Union Commission managed to bring forth in its journey over the years. Tigist Sarnesa has reviewed the following story.
Agenda 2063 is a set of initiatives proposed and currently under implementation by the African Union. It was adopted on 31st January 2015 at the 24th Ordinary Assembly of the Heads of State and Governments of the African Union in Addis Ababa.
What is the Africa that I want?
I want to have an Africa where there will be less hunger. There will be equal opportunity.
An Africa that is able to create jobs for its young people.
I want an Africa that is self-sufficient to feed its population.
The Africa that is able to derive the bulk of its income from agriculture in the sense of having raw materials that are produced by the African farmers.
The Africa that we see that we can use science to solve most of the problems.
I would like also to make sure that women are also not left behind in Africa.
How exciting would it be to live in that Africa? And so you get motivated into putting your shoulder to the wheel and building the Africa you want in whatever corner you may be.
The launch of issuance of e-passport, in January 2016 was one of the milestones achievements by the African Union Commission.
We look forward to is to give ownership to our member states so that each sovereign state on the continent could issue the passport to the citizens that it deems that qualify to receive it.
It is to be recalled that African Union Commission also launched the African Continental Free Trade, or AFCFTA, a trade deal covering a market of more than 1.2 billion people and up to $3 trillion in combined GDP.
We are about to witness the realization of one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063. Throughout this process, we have stood united with 55 sovereign AU member states rallying together despite different levels of economic development and diverse strategic priorities. The commencement of trading under the AFCFTA on the 1st of January 2021 is one of the most significant milestones in the continental integration project.
These milestone triumphs by the African Union Commission were among the benchmarks that the Union can bring Africans together in giving rise to African solutions to African problems, uniting Africans across the continent and achieving socio-economic and political independence of the entire continent. But many say a lot remains to be done by the African leaders, the AU, and other concerned entities for the end result of these initiatives launched at different times in history of the African Union.
Now let's move on to other stories. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson, Ambassador Dina Mufti, says the new appointment of ambassadors by President Sahle-Work Zewde is based on the yardstick of the ministry and is mainly focused on the career.
Ethiopia has appointed close to 27 ambassadors abroad this week. The yardsticks for appointing these ambassadors is actually the following yardsticks are being considered. One is defending national interest and the capacity of these ambassadors in that regard. Career development is also the focus. Promoting the spirit of reform is also considered. Actually, career is a major focus when it comes to appointing these ambassadors.
According to him, the ministry also aims to safeguard the national interest and achieve the goal of development endeavors of the nation in the field of diplomacy. Take a listen to this.
There will be different models of deployment as well. We will have resident ambassadors, non-resident ambassadors, and ambassadors with limited manpower as well. Otherwise, there is an intention of deploying all potentials of public diplomacy when it comes to promoting the national interest of the country. In general, the country will beef up its diplomatic representations through initiating and strengthening the role of Ethiopians in the diaspora as well.
The Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister Demeke Mekonnen has exchanged a phone call with the Foreign Minister of Sweden. The discussion between the two sides focused on bilateral relations and current issues in Ethiopia. Demeke spoke in detail about the peace initiative the government of Ethiopia has been undertaking, in particular the recent release of prisoners and the proposed dialogue. Despite the government's decision to halt the advance of its troops to the Tigray region, the TPLF has demonstrated its belligerence, attacking adjacent regions such as the Abala district in the Afar region, hindering the flow of humanitarian aid to the region. The Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister thanked Sweden for following a balanced approach regarding judgments on the situation in Ethiopia. The Swedish Foreign Minister has lauded the peace initiative of the government, pledged to support it, and expressed hope that it would pave the way for lasting peace in Ethiopia.
جمعتنا كل فيزك حلفلو علامات تعتسي ما خلو يا بلو ورا يا امبلو يا بلو يا بلو سلام لبعت ليت بهجنا انت خالق عند مسايم صبر يا قدس سلام لبعت ليت بهجنا يا علامنا انا وحده قسق لا لا عرفك هاي لا لا يا عصر حمد هاي لا لا يا ايام بالقوبس
Welcome back. You're still watching Addis News Hour. The Planning and Development Minister Fitsum Assefa stresses the need to boost the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and exploit the platform as a big opportunity for alternative market platform. Planning and Development Ministry has reviewed a 100-day plan performance of the Trade and Regional Integration Ministry. On the occasion, Fitsum underlined that it is indispensable to enhance AFCFTA as an immense opportunity to boost trade ties and economic integration in the region. She said that remarkable achievements are being gained in areas including bilateral trade ties and negotiations, delivery of important export services, advancement of trade registration and licensing services, price normalization in the trade sector, and control of contraband trade, among others. Fitsum further stressed the need to expand destinations for export of goods in the future. And now let's take a quick look at the exchange rates of some currencies, and I'll be right back. Let's also take a quick look at the weather updates of some African nations. And finally, a quick reminder of the top stories before we go. The Ministry of Health calls for strict adherence to COVID-19 prevention protocols during AU Summit.